Hello everybody, John Greenwood here with a map of Coinage crates for a advanced guide on Kriegsspiel. This guide is going to be covering the three branches of 19th century military, which is infantry, cavalry, and artillery, showing you how they actually work in the field and combating a lot of misconceptions that I get from various players, and kind of showing other umpires how to adjudicate these, how to represent them on the field, and then also, you know, at the same time showing the players how this looks on the field and some of the things that they can order, and kind of showing you some good ways to use your different units. So the first thing that we need to remember is that, infantry, cavalry, and artillery are three different branches under the Prussian War College. So these infantry over here are different than the artillery over here, which is different than cavalry over here, and they're not really similar at all. These are three different disciplines requiring separate mastery. Today we have three different branches of sort of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and back then the equivalent would have been to infantry, artillery, and cavalry. Like, they're just totally different. The infantry would be like the Army equivalent back then. The artillery would probably be the Navy, and the cavalry would probably be the Air Force, to give a sort of loose analogy. So don't treat these the same as each other. There's some formations and principles that are shared across all three of them, but the differences between them are quite considerable, actually. So first of all is the infantry branch, which includes skirmishers, these smaller blocks in front. There's artillery, which includes both horse artillery and foot artillery. And then cavalry were understood at the time to all be one branch. Okay, so any umpire who conflates these together is going to make compounding errors through their whole game. Keep them mentally separate in your mind. Okay, so there are two formations that are common to all three branches. There's a line, which is horizontal like this, and column, which is vertical like this. Okay, these formations are shared across all of them. With the line, this is a line here. Okay, you're arranged horizontally facing the enemy this way. All right, and this is sort of the default position for most of history. As you get later and later, the column actually becomes the default formation, but this is what most people default to. They just, most players order their guys in a line and say shoot the other side. Okay, if you're wanting to shoot the other side and not charge them with bayonets, you go into line formation, and that's what that kind of looks like. All right, column, there's a couple different kinds of columns. I've arranged them here. So there's open column, which is this formation here. There is also assault column and company column, which are both represented in the same way here. But they mean different things within sort of what these blocks are representing. These blocks here are what I would call marching column, probably. And what this is basically just, when you're most of the time when you're maneuvering on the battlefield in a Kriegsspiel, your guys are going to be like this in the maneuver phase beforehand. This open column formation, it's confusing because the terms are sort of switched sometimes. Sometimes people will call this one open column and this one marching column. This one is more of like on a really long march, your guys are going to spread out like this. And so basically in a Kriegsspiel, you're never going to see this. This is more like if your scenario started in the middle of an ambush on a long march, that's what it would look like. If your guys are like marching anywhere, they should look like this column here, okay? But you can order your men to march around in assault column or company columns, which is this depiction. Under the rules, they actually specify that this is what it looks like. And what that means is I've kind of arranged something here. So an assault column is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 individual lines, and they're sort of arranged in platoons, because there's 8 platoons in a there's 8 platoons in a battalion. Company columns is the same thing, except there's 2 platoons in a company, and there's 4 companies in a battalion, so they're marching like this, right? In a column formation, they're just in company columns, okay? So company column, assault column, same thing, but kind of different. In terms of actually the blocks on the board, it's gonna almost always look like this. I've sort of set up a standard engagement here between 2 brigades that are in standard battle formation. So they've both got skirmishers deployed at the appropriate distance, right? And they have their battle line set up. And the reserve, and this is something that a lot of people will make the mistake of, is in column instead of line, okay? All of the reserves should be in column instead of line. And the reason for this is actually pretty obvious once you think about it, because basically we're getting into the concept of intervals, which is something I wanted to discuss. So the importance of interval is probably the single most common misunderstood principle by umpires and players. Intervals are sort of the mandatory gaps between units and between different lines. So if we were to say this is a line and this is a line, the actual terms for these are echelon. So let me write that out. ECHELON, French term. This is an echelon. This is an echelon. So there's 2 echelons in this formation. So the second echelon, which is typically the reserve, is going to be in column formation, okay? And there's intervals between the units, okay? So that's these spaces here. Those are intervals. But there's also spaces between the first and the second echelon, all right? And there's actually regulations for how big these are, and I'll tell you what the regulations are, and I'll tell you why they are that way. So in terms of between units in a line, for example, the spacing is supposed to be 100 paces. And the reason for this is that the width of the columns waiting in reserve behind them are 75 paces. So you give a bit of clearance in case of, errors, to give yourself a margin of error. But otherwise, they're basically the width of the unit. And so what this allows, and why you don't want these guys in line formation behind them, is, first of all, it allows the front line to retreat behind the cover of this line, right? And second of all, it allows this line to push forward and assault through the intervals. And this is how you actually move through your own lines. You don't just magically teleport through the other guys, as is commonly depicted in video games like Total War. You actually have to leave an interval. You can't just do that. This is illegal. You cannot do this. This is physically impossible. If you read historical accounts of units countercharging through their own line, this is not what's happening. This is what's happening. Okay, so now you're getting a clearer picture of what's going on historically, and it's the same sort of thing for skirmishers. So let me show you what happens with skirmishers. Let me just duplicate these. It's the same kind of thing. They have intervals as well, intervals between them, and intervals, intervals like this and intervals like this, okay? And what they'll do when they retreat, so this is kind of what skirmisher deployment looks like, right? They start back here because they're the rear rank, and then they move back, separate from the unit, and they form up over here, okay? It's kind of a rendezvous before they get going. Okay, and then what will happen is they move to the side and switch to a kind of column formation here, like this, and they'll wait beside the wings of the unit. And then what will happen is once they've been given the go-ahead signal and then everything looks okay, is they will beeline towards the regulation distance, which is about 400 paces. And then once they're at that distance, they sort of fan out in a very loose formation, like so. And the retreating is the reverse, right? If these guys break, what happens is they sort of loosely form a mass, a blob or whatever, and they retreat, and they retreat down the sides of these, and they kind of turn into a column, and they slip through here, and the same thing, would be going on the other side, right? And you'll notice, because we left appropriate spacing with the intervals, there's space for our skirmishers to come through. Isn't that beautiful? And then they sort of go back into the back of the unit, like so. And in terms of representing this, you would just delete those pieces, okay? So yeah, players who grew up in something like Total War are going to be used to stacking their pieces something like this, right? Where all the units are very closely against each other, and then their reserve battalion is right behind it, and they're just in a line as well. And when these guys flee, they just teleport through, and this is just completely historically inaccurate. The frontage is all wrong. You've understood the mechanics wrong of what's going on. This is what's going on. You can see that the footprint of the unit is like, I don't know, at least 3 times larger than the footprint of this unit. Do you see how this is way bigger, and the impact that this unit has? Look at this. Look at this square that we've taken up, right? This is almost like half a mile squared, maybe even more than that. Like, this is almost a square mile of space that we're taking up versus this. This is what happens in real life. This is what happens historically. This is fantasy. Don't do this. Do this, okay? And then you don't have to worry about the explanation of, like, how did these guys slip through the ranks? Well, like, it's obvious how they slipped through the ranks. You left space for them. And again, these guys can just flee back normally because these guys are in column formation and they left a handy space for them. And once these guys filter through, right? If these guys filter through, now these guys can quickly shift to line formation while these guys recover in column. And now you're seeing how kind of a retreat in real life would happen. So that's how they're able to hold the line during a retreat and so on. And hopefully this has enhanced your understanding of what actually happens in real life. Well, I say in real life, this doesn't happen anymore, but it happened in real life. This is how they actually organized themselves, okay? And this is really important because it has like knock-on effects of tactical considerations, right? The frontage of this unit is a lot larger than the frontage of this unit, and like multiplied several times, right? The effect is compounding, right? These guys are only a mile and a bit long, but if I were to duplicate this unit a few times, and keep in mind there's also regulations about the intervals between these, right? So this isn't even a completely accurate depiction of what's going on. Like, these guys are really, really, I mean, this is only 2 and it's already the size of the other one. That's 3 now. Look at the size of these. Do you see how much bigger the real version is, right? And this accounts for some of the discrepancies. Like, a lot of people are trying to recreate historical battles in Kriegsspiel, and they're like, the frontage is a little off. These guys are taking up much less space than I thought, or much less space than I read. Well, it's because you're not taking account of the intervals. This is a lot more imposing, right? This is, hold on, if I duplicate this one more time, this is a full corps right here, technically, without its artillery contingent. Do you see how massive this is? Like, this is almost 2.5 miles versus this, which was not even a quarter, 1.2 miles or something. Hopefully it's become clear just how big of an issue this causes at especially at larger scales. But just arranging your guys in the historical way lends a long way to sort of understanding what's going on and being able to explain how certain things happen to the players. Another thing to note, this is just a historical nitpick. It's not too important. Historical convention, which is traceable to like Roman times with Vegetius, is to number units starting from the right-hand flank. And the reason that this is because the commander starts on the right. So if this is the commander, he starts here, and now he's the anchor. And now his men start forming up by looking to their right towards their commander, and they're looking at the right to line up. So this guy looks at the commander, this guy looks at that guy, this guy looks at that guy, this guy looks at that guy, and this is how a line is actually formed. Physically speaking. So that's why, the formation itself is going to start on the right-hand side, which then gets, applied here. So now this guy is the anchor, and then this guy lines up based on where he is, and then this guy lines up based on where he is. And now you've learned how to properly form a line. Same sort of thing with the column, but that's a little more intuitive to most people. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's more intuitive. But the reason that you want the numbering on the right-hand side is because that's how they actually form up. And then that also tells you information about how to transition from column to line formation. How do these guys start forming a line? Well, now it's obvious to us. This guy goes in first, then this guy goes on his left, and finally this guy goes in on his left. And now we understand how the line is being formed, and now we have a bit more of an idea of how this actually happens. They don't just like form up in a big mass on the corner and then go left. They're waiting for this guy, and then this guy goes, and then this guy goes, which has implications in terms of like how long does this maneuver take, right? And this is why you'll hear sources talk about how long it takes to form a battle line. Like this would take, if this was the actual column, from this to this takes at least 25 minutes, more like 30 if we're being realistic. And so this is why when you hear, examples from the Kriegsspiel rule books, they have these huge time jumps of like 30 minutes, and nobody bats an eye at it because it takes you 30 minutes to form up your battle formations, and there's no point like going through it unless the other guy is like counterattacking you in the middle of forming your guys, which would be, I guess interesting to see. But unless that's happening, there's just no reason to do every single tick, and they didn't. Like when both sides are just forming up, they just say, okay, well, 20 minutes passes, half an hour passes, whatever. They just skip it. But you're not going to be forming this battle line in a single turn. It's not going to go in a 10-minute or even a 20-minute turn. It's going to take like probably 30 minutes to form this, because these guys have to form, and then these guys have to form behind them as well, and the skirmishers have to go out. Definitely at least 30 minutes if you're going to include the skirmishers. Maybe even something like 40 or 45 minutes. Like it takes a really long time to to organize all this and get everybody correct, which has implications as well for the usefulness of cavalry. Like, what are they doing during the time? Or artillery, right? Are the artillery bombarding this position while this is going on? I don't know. Could be something to consider, right? Because, all right, well, where am I going to form my men up? I can't just form them up in the middle of this field with direct exposure to the artillery. I got to find a good place to form them up and then, you know, go over the crest of the hill and attack the enemy and march straight into his fire or whatever, right? If I'm just sitting here for 30 minutes just completely exposed to artillery, it's a bad time. And then that also has tactical implications of, like, how far do I want to be from the enemy when I am forming up, right? I don't want to form up right in front of him. Like, if this is going to take me an hour almost, then I want enough time to form up my guys without being interrupted and to be able to, like, respond to anything that he does. You know, if he is charging at me, I want to have ample time to respond. So I got to be forming up at least a mile away from the enemy, probably more like 3,000 paces from the enemy, because, you know, like, I just need enough time, like at least a mile away from the other guy. I mean, my own formation takes up like a mile. So yeah, all kinds of knock-on effects when you consider the scale and the actual formations. So if we were to take this formation here and we were to say that they were trying to form a standard battle formation, right? How would I do this very quickly? So what I would do is I would highlight all these, and then TTS, it'll keep the left-hand anchor as the piece that you're hovering over. So if you just hover over the 3, so you want to start your drag with the pieces that are going to be on the left, and then you want to continue drag towards the right. And so now I want to hover over, when I'm grabbing them, the piece that's going to be on the left-hand anchor, and then I hit 1 on my keyboard, and that makes them into a big formation. And then I can just set up the intervals manually here. And then in terms of these guys, we can just turn them like this and put them in the intervals that I just made. So these guys can go here and these guys can go here. Which side do you put them on? Do you put them with this guy coming out the left, or do you put them with this guy coming out the right? The answer is most of the time you put them with this guy coming out of the left. There are situations where you would put this guy out of the right. And the reason for this is artillery, because artillery, when normally forms up, it's normally going to form up on the right-hand side. And there's going to be artillery right here. So that's why you would want the second echelon, the reserve, to be on the left with that guy poking out instead of on this side, because there's not really space for him. You don't want to hit him with friendly fire or something. Okay, so that's kind of why you do that. That kind of leads me a little bit into column marches in general. So I've put a demonstration here. So you can march your guys on here, and you can just order your cavalry to march beside the road to save space. Like, you don't actually have to march on the road. You're just kind of following it as a guide so you don't get lost. And it's totally cool for you to march guys across an open field, or march them like in a beeline towards this town, right? If we were to say, oh, there's guys at Libyan or something, you know, as long as these guys have like a sight line on the town, like, it's totally fine for them to just adjust crudely and beeline it towards the town. They don't have to actually go along the road. The cavalry especially don't have to go on the road. It's much better for them to be beside the road so that they can get in front of the infantry and then get back on the road once they're in front. And in terms of where the artillery should be, these artillery should be, according to doctrine, the best place for them is behind the 1st Battalion of the column, and then this is their traditional place for when they're deploying to the right. And this kind of makes sense, right? Because when this guy stops, he's going to stop like this, and now he's the anchor, and now this guy doesn't have to do any complicated math to see where he is going to place his guns. He can just go to the right of the right anchor because he knows that the entire rest of the formation is going to be going that way, and there's going to be nobody over here. So that's why the guns go on the right hand side. And now you're learning a lot about how a battle like actually gets executed, which is really interesting, and it adds a lot of like understanding to you as an umpire, like what I should be doing, and you know what the effect of this counterattack would be, or like where should I place the player's artillery since they didn't specify. What if the player wanted their artillery on the left-hand side? Well, we would probably switch the cavalry to the right-hand side and then just have the artillery like go off-road on the left and just have them like that, right? Or put them at the back of the formation or something like that, or put them, you know, second to last in the penultimate position in their thing. I would probably maybe put them to the left or to the last, if you're going to put them on the left-hand side, which is uncommon, not without precedent, but kind of uncommon. Let's say you want to be like a Napoleon and you want to put your artillery in the center. Well, now we have a kind of idea of where our artillery should be. Okay, so this is going to be the 1st Brigade, and then the 2nd Brigade is going to be behind them, and we want the artillery with the 2nd Brigade because the 2nd Brigade is going to be to the left of the 1st Brigade, because the 1st Brigade is going to be on the right, because it's just like these lining up here. The 1st Brigade is going to be over here, and then the 2nd Brigade is going to look to their right and line up based on that. So based on that, we know that if we know where the right-hand anchor of the 2nd Brigade is, we can put artillery to the right of that right anchor, and they will be perfectly in the middle of the formation as long as we leave regulation sized intervals. And so then what that would look like, right, is you have, you know, 1st Brigade over here and 2nd Brigade over here, and now there's some nice juicy land for the artillery to be in, and that's how you get your artillery in the middle. You can also do, you know, complicated things like, you know, if you want your artillery intermixed with your infantry, you know, people have this idea that they're like in the middle of the unit. Well, no, that's like really stupid. It's not a mystery. You know, you just put a half battery here and a half battery here in the intervals, and, you know, Bob's your uncle. Like, it's not complicated. It's actually really obvious how they did that, because, you know, the frontage of this unit is like almost perfectly how it would fit in an interval. So it's not difficult for the artillery to fit there, and then now you have your artillery guns mixed in with your infantry if you wanted to do that, right? Or if you wanted to put them in the middle, you do what we said before, right? All these little details, especially the intervals, like people really neglect the intervals, and the intervals are like really what makes the system shine. Like Kriegsspiel as a whole was kind of designed for this purpose, to kind of figure out intervals and which intervals you should leave, and the spacing of the units and how much time it takes. So this is really where the system shines. And if you just do, you know, a stupid straight line, like a lot of people tend to do, you're really missing out on a lot of nuance of actual warfare, and you're not doing things very realistically. You know, just have intervals. It's, you know, do your line, right, and then give it a little bit of space, and now you have a lot more room to do things. You have, right, space for the artillery, you got space for the reinforcements to come through, you got space for the skirmishers. It's, yeah, anyways, so you leave 100 paces between these units for a reason. It's so that you can go like this and they can go like that. Okay, that's why you do that. And then in terms of what's the space here, it depends on the time period. The time period changes this. So basically the interval is based off of how big the range is for effective rifle fire, infantry fire. So in the 1870s, it's going to be 400, because after 400, there's a big steep fall off. So they're 400 away so that they can't be effectively shot by the enemy, and this gives them a lot of time to adjust, and you could, counter charge a flanking maneuver, or if you got charged in the rear, right, these guys would get hit first, and these guys would have enough time to sort of turn around and countercharge them, because there's a big interval in the way. If you were in Napoleonic times, it would be shorter, because the effective range of musket fire is shorter, so it'd be 300, right? They're a little bit closer. And it's the same thing for skirmishers. The range is 400 for skirmishers, because that's how far you shoot, right? And then, in terms of that, it just kind of changes based on the period. I assume in the 1700s it would be like 200, but it would be the same kind of thing. The 100 paces between the units doesn't really change over most of history from what I've been able to read. You still want those intervals. It changes in medieval times, but like in terms of black powder stuff, you're going to be leaving 100 paces intervals, and 200 to 400 paces intervals between echelons and skirmishers. Okay, so in terms of Napoleonics, like this is what Napoleonics might look like. So this would be, the British line, and this is the French line here in blue. And you can see that they're 300 away instead of 400 because of the shorter rifle distance. And this would be a standard French brigade formation. This is called mixed order. This is what Napoleon used in, this is his bread and butter. So you got the battalion in the middle in line formation, and they would deploy their skirmishers. You would probably also have skirmishers in front of these guys as well, right, to cover their advance. But basically what would happen as the attack is ordered, these guys kind of stay in place to pin these guys down and shoot them, and then these guys move forward and they crash into you with bayonets and everything, right? That's kind of what the mixed order is. French brigade is only 3 instead of the later 6, because basically all the brigades were like half strength because of conscription. It's a very long story, but French brigades tended to be more around 3. But anyways, you would have the middle bit in here, and then the flanks are already deployed in assault columns, and you would have skirmishers as human shields, just kind of going forward. Okay, so that's what a Napoleonic type formation would look like. As you can see, it's still very similar to what would have been going on in the 1870s, right? This is the 1870s standard picture. This is the 1812 standard picture, with the British in standard battle line, and then the French in a concentrated column almost. Okay, so now that I've covered all of the infantry stuff, we're going to move on to cavalry. So the critical thing that most umpires forget is that these guys are 100 riders, while these guys are, between 600 to 1,000, right? This whole battalion is 600 to 1,000. So the idea that these guys are going to have a big impact on 1,000 men, 10 times their number, is a pretty big mistake, okay? You need multiple units of these to even have a chance at fighting the infantry, which is kind of getting ahead of myself. But anyways, like I wouldn't even roll this on a table. Like, even though the hussars have gotten in on a rear charge, somehow teleported here and surprised, like, it's still 1,000 men versus 100. I wouldn't even roll this. I would just say you lose badly. like your men surrender probably, right? There really isn't much of a chance here. We're not interested in that kind of game. You need to commit multiple cavalry blocks no matter what time period you're talking about to create a meaningful engagement against even one battalion. One battalion is way stronger than most people give it credit for, okay? And in terms of different types, okay, so hussars are pretty universally light cavalry, right? That's kind of what they mean over time. They don't have armor. Their horses don't have a lot of stuff on them. And then there's all these cavalry types, okay? And generally the gist of it is that these cavalry over here, sorry, not hussars, these cavalry over here, there's no real meaningful difference between them in terms of mechanical effect in battle. The Prussians didn't even bother to sort of make rules for them. They just had one cavalry type because most people in the 1870s didn't use anything other than hussars. These types of cavalry were mostly dead by the time of the 1870s, but when they did use these types, these are all one type of cavalry, okay? There's no meaningful distinction between them in terms of gameplay and in terms of tactics. These are all shock cavalry, and then these are all light cavalry, okay? That's the difference between them, unless by dragoons you mean like the old type of dragoons where they have rifles, and then you just sort of treat them like small infantry blocks. Those would be different. But, dragoons for the most part actually means just sort of elite cavalry. And then these guys are cavalry with like breastplate almost, and then lancers are usually not having body armor, but they're meant to be a heavy cavalry, shock cavalry, okay? And so what you do with those guys is you put them in one big mass, and then you just find something to charge and you just charge it, okay? That's what they're used for. You don't split them up into itty little bits. What they are meant to do is meant to stay in one gigantic block and just pulverize whatever they run into. That's what they are for, okay? They are marginally better than the hussars. The advantage provided by the armor on them really isn't that big of a difference in terms of like how much damage they deal and how many casualties they take. It's really just a mind game thing. Like you see a man in armor running towards you, and it's more intimidating than a man running towards you without armor. In terms of like the actual killing part of it, there's really no huge difference. The huge difference is going to be the morale impact, okay? And so these guys are marginally more effective than these guys. They're not as effective as you think they are. There is a reason that they went out of practice, and it's not just finances. They are incredibly expensive to maintain and recruit, yes, but they're also... they just have limited battlefield effectiveness. And so, considering their costs, it's just a lot more cheaper and effective to have a buttload of hussars versus an elite unit of heavy cavalry. Okay, so I've covered what you do with heavy cavalry. What you do with light cavalry is basically opposite. You basically never want to charge these guys in a mass into the enemy. They will almost always lose. In this engagement, they would probably lose because they've got 2 battalions. That's 2,000 men versus 600, right? Okay, you have to keep the perspective in mind that these blocks are 100 men. Okay, what these are used for instead is seizing opportunities and holding up formations and scouting, right? They can be used to delay, to recon, and to cause logistical havoc, okay? So these guys could, more appropriate use of them could be to swing around here and eat up this unattended baggage train before these guys can respond, right? That's a great use of those guys. Another great use of them, I have set something up over here, right? If this commander over here wants to know where red is, and maybe he can't really see them because they're too far, right? He's going to split these guys up, and he's going to send them in every direction, right? He's going to send them in every direction to every little town, okay? And one of them is going to see the enemy, odds are, right? Unless the enemy is just nowhere near you. Okay, so you just send them out, and then you figure out where the enemy is based on the reports, right? This guy reports back, and he's like, yeah, they're not here. Yep, they're not here. They're not here. They're not here either. They're not here either. And then, you know, this guy, either he's going to give you a report that he sees the enemy over here, or he's not going to give you a report at all because Red found him and killed him, and he just never comes back. But either way, you kind of know where Red is based on the fact that, you know, this guy went in this way, everybody else came back, this guy didn't. Ergo, the enemy is probably over here and killed or captured him, right? Or he manages to get back and he's really messed up. Point is, they're really useful for scouting. That's their best use, arguably. And then what you can also do with cavalry is a delaying action. Maybe this whole line is over here. They're like all the way back in the city, right? And they're just really far from the assault that's about to happen. They're at least 10, maybe 15 minutes. Okay, and I know that my guys are going to smash into here, right? So this is going to be 3, 4, 5, 6 versus 3. That's a winning engagement for me. So what I want to do is I want to delay these guys from approaching here and causing trouble for my infantry. Even though I'm not going to win this engagement, I know I'm not going to win this, it's still worth it for me to do something like this and charge into them, even though I will lose, for the sole purpose of delaying the approach of these guys so that I can divide and conquer. Okay, that's what I mean by delaying action. Okay, so those guys can be really useful for that, or for seizing a bridge. If there was a bridge somewhere, maybe this bridge, you could clog this bridge by putting cavalry on it, or you could clog the bridge by putting cavalry within charging distance of the bridge, and now it becomes impossible under the rules to actually take this bridge from the cavalry to dislodge them. You'll need like artillery support or something. So those are some really useful uses for cavalry. There's a couple cavalry considerations that I wanted us to keep in mind. The biggest of them is forests. I see players and umpires make this mistake all the time because of Hollywood, basically, or Total War, interchangeable to me. They're both fantasy. It'd kind of be like trying to drive a car through a forest without a road. Technically, it's possible. Like, you could dodge a bunch of trees and the worst of the brush and then just brute force your way through a couple bushes. But you would be going pretty slow, and if you were trying to drive in a line with 100 other cars, good luck, right? Like, you're just not going to be able to accomplish it. So, if we were to reverse this example, right? If blue is in the forest here and red is on this hill here and he wants to charge into the forest, what happens is that the cavalry, once they reach the edge of the forest, they're going to slow down to a walking speed. And now it's going to become effectively impossible for the red team to dislodge the blue battalion from this position. Keep in mind, they still outnumber the horses. And basically every advantage of cavalry is completely negated by woods, okay? So when cavalry are in the woods, you should basically treat them like small infantry blocks. So now this is effectively, 600 infantry versus 1,000. Are they going to win that fight? Probably not. I mean, maybe they do, but like, odds are they're not. And if you want to maximize the impact of cavalry, don't use them in the woods. And it's the same kind of thing like moving through the woods. Again, they kind of count like infantry. They move at a really slow pace. They can't gallop or anything like that. if they can even move in the forest at all, which is up to the umpire's discretion. And then it's kind of the same story coming out, right? So, if you wanted to hide your cavalry in the forest during deployment phase, like you could do that. It's not impossible, right? They have the time to go walk into place, but be careful about it, because if they're coming out of the woods, they gotta walk out of the woods, which gives this guy time to just absolutely eviscerate you and turn you into Swiss cheese, right? You're not going to be charging out of the woods. You're going to be walking out of the woods until you're clear of the woods, and then you're going to charge, which gives the enemy plenty of time to answer to you. What's much better is just to hide behind the woods, right? Hide behind the woods and, post a guy like around the corner to keep watch. And then, once this guy's, coming around here, we all of a sudden appear around the corner and just smash into that. That's what you should be using the woods for with cavalry. You shouldn't be marching them through. And then there's a similar sort of problem. Urban engagements, right? Okay, so a lot of umpires allow this to happen where the cavalry just kind of charges into the city. Yeah, no. These are solid buildings. You can't charge into them with cavalry, right? The horse is just going to smash into the stone. And then in terms of like the streets, like they're going to be narrowed into this choke point, right? This is kind of what this would look like. I got the wrong colors here, right? But this is kind of what it looks like, right? This block here is this infantry here, and this block here is this block here, right? Like, you're not getting through this. And in fact, all of these guys are going to shoot you, and they're going to focus their fire on you, and you're going to be completely gone. You are going through a narrow choke point. You are asking to be annihilated. So this is why in my opinion, cavalry are completely useless in urban engagements. Just keep them away from the city. If you want them to guard a city, don't have them in the city. Just have them on the field outside of the city. It accomplishes the same task without you having all the penalties of being in the actual city itself, or better yet, hide behind the city. And then, the enemy doesn't really see you as they approach because you're being hidden by the buildings, and then you can sort of go around and surprise the enemy that way. So that's basically the gist of cavalry. They have sort of the same formations as infantry. I'm sure you're able to see, right? They have the columns, they have the lines. So their lines are basically 2 would be standard. 2x3 square would be a standard regiment charging in. And if you had more regiments, you might want to consider doing this. The charge of the light brigade was something like this in history. So they had, kind of one wave after the other smash into the artillery, and it took that many cavalry to dislodge the artillery. Cavalry are a lot weaker than you think they are. In medieval times, it's the opposite. Cavalry are completely dominant, but in the 1800s, cavalry are really highly situational. Let's move on to artillery. Okay, so the first thing to remember is the guns can stack like this, but when they're deployed, they look like this. This is a full battery. These wagons are supposed to be about 100 paces from them. Doesn't really matter too much if you adhere to that fully or not. What I wanted to discuss was where to deploy them. We've already talked a little bit about this, how they usually get deployed on the right somewhere. You can deploy them on a hill, and most players have the instinct of like, okay, I'm going to deploy them on the hill and I'm going to fire over my guys. Or I'm going to deploy them behind my forces and have them fire over my guys. Well, you don't really want to do that. I've given an illustration here of a case where you could do it, just so you see, like, this did happen in history, but really infrequently. Okay, so at Königsgrades, which is what this map is, the artillery were deployed here, and they did fire over friendly lines, sort of like this towards the forest over there. I think it was more like that. Yeah, something like that. Okay, let's pretend that he's firing at these guys over here. Okay, perfectly acceptable to do that, except if these guys were here, because what's going to happen is, if this is our crude diagram of what's going on, so you got, you know, your artillery over here, and they're firing, right? And your men are down here, right? You don't want them too close to the edge of this cliff in case this misfires, and then the rounds go like this and either fall on or explode on your own men. So you can't have them right next to the artillery, but you can fire overhead. Like if these blue guys were in Lipa, for example, I believe this was actually the historical configuration. And this is okay because the difference is steep enough, okay? So, and there's a huge height difference, so there's no worry about hitting your own guys. In that case, it's okay. But in majority of the cases that players order their guys to fire over their heads, it's not okay. So this over here would probably be okay to fire on these guys. These guys up here would probably be okay to fire against these guys down here, because as you can see, it's a very steep grade. Right now, they're only firing over skirmishers, and it's a 50-foot or more difference to fire on the town below, so it's okay. But if they had guys in front of them, right? If these guys started to go in front of them, no, you have to stop firing, okay? Otherwise, you're going to hit your own men, and nobody really wants that, okay? So this map is unique in that, like, this is a very hilly, cliffy, ridgy sort of area of Europe. Most of Europe is going to look more like this section of the map, where it's very flat. This is a particularly hilly area of Europe, and so there's all kinds of opportunities to fire overhead. But like over here, no, like it doesn't matter where you are, you're not going to be firing overhead of anybody or anything. It's just not steep enough. It's not a big enough of a difference, okay? So in most cases, what you want to do is deploy your artillery to one of the flanks, right? Go on the left flank or the right flank, right? Or deploy them in the intervals and shoot that way, or deploy, make a big interval in the middle, make some space for them in the middle, and fire that way like Napoleon does, okay? And just don't cross the line of fire. Try not to cross the line of fire. One of the other things about artillery is, a lot of people forget this, but artillery is going to have a lesser effect on troops hiding in urban areas, and artillery is going to have a lesser effect on people hiding in forests. And then also need to count for, whether a hill would hide somebody. So if I had infantry hiding in this depression, and I had artillery on this side of the hill, they would not be able to fire on them because of the crest of the hill that's in the way here. So just keep that in mind when you're doing artillery. And in terms of transitioning between limbered, as they call it, and unlimbered or deployed, the transition time is 2 minutes according to the rules. It should be really quick. In terms of the difference between foot artillery and horse artillery, the difference is that these are actually both pulled by horses. The horse artillery is their crew is on horseback as well, for the most part, or being pulled by the wagon, versus the foot artillery, most of the crew is on foot. And so this allows the horse artillery to go faster than the foot artillery. In the example game that I examined, it seems like the umpires made a mistake and allowed the foot artillery to move at a trot, which shouldn't really be possible. I think you could make an argument for foot artillery being able to go double speed, so 200 paces per minute, which is faster than infantry. I think that could be a reasonable argument. But in terms of like trotting or galloping, no, not really. Unless you want to leave your crew behind to die and just save the guns, but then you're just kind of scuttling the guns, basically. That's another thing that you can order, is you can order your guns to be spiked. And so what this is basically you take a spike and you jam it through the gun itself, and it makes it so unrepairable that you basically have to reforge the gun from scratch, right? You have to like melt down the entire barrel and just start all over again. And this will prevent the enemy from using your guns against you. So spiking the guns could be something that you can order. And again, this would be done in like probably 2 minutes. All this takes is, the guy pulls out the spike and he hammers it into the cannon. It really takes no time at all to do. I would almost do it like instantaneously if it was ordered. One last thing for artillery is, where they're allowed to deploy. Can you put artillery in the woods? Can you put artillery in the marsh? Basically, it's complicated. In terms of the marsh, no. Pretty much universally no. I'm sure there's exceptions, but no. Basically, the guns are like so heavy that they're going to sink into the mud, right? Or get stuck. And it's going to cause all kinds of problems for you. So don't deploy in the marsh. One other thing that people don't take into account is rocky outcrops. I'm not sure if any are on this map. But if you had a rocky outcrop, you would not be able to deploy on it. I'm trying to find one. I don't think I can. When the artillery starts firing, it kicks up all the loose rocks, or creates cracks in the rocks from the sheer force of the gunfire. And basically what it does is it shoots shrapnel everywhere, all over the crew and the horses, and it basically creates like a grenade going off at the artillery. And so that's why you can't deploy on a rocky outcrop for artillery. It makes the artillery destroy itself. So keep that in mind. You would also want to avoid similar things in the deeps of the woods. Deploying at the edge of the wood is a tactic that the Prussians eventually adopt. So it seems like it was possible. I don't think you could adequately move these very fast through woods. You'd have to take it on a case-by-case basis. But I used to tell people, like, just don't deploy in the woods, because it just wasn't done. Like, people just didn't deploy in the woods until about the 1870s. And so it'd be kind of like unrealistic, I guess, for you to deploy in the woods. But I guess technically it's possible. The other thing that I didn't cover was infantry squares, but this is pretty easy. Just depict them like assault columns and just do this. You don't need to do anything fancy for the for them. You could do them like this, like whichever direction is more important that they have a narrow front on, just do them like that. And what that is the men form a square like this, where they're facing out in each direction with a bunch of pointy bayonets. The commander is on the corner here, usually with a flag bearer. And this is basically super effective against cavalry, and it's going to wreak havoc on cavalry. So, take that into account as well. You can order squares, and that should happen relatively quickly, definitely within 5 minutes, maybe less time than that. It really depends on the circumstances, depends on the training of the men, depends on what's going on. If they see cavalry coming from miles away, they might just go into squares. Some advanced learning here, showing you how things happened in real history to give you a better sense of what the heck is going on in this game, and giving you a better sense of like how to umpire things and sort of the decisions that should be made as like a default measure, how formations should be arranged, keeping into account the intervals. For core level play, what the Prussians did was, for marching down roads, they had a rule where no more than a single corps can march down a road at a time. So if you have multiple corps, right, if you have an army, which is typically 2 or more corps, 2 to 3 corps per army, by regulation it would be 2, but sometimes 3. Anyways, that means you're keeping 2 divisions on one road, and then you got to find another road for your second division. So maybe they go this way, and they have to come all the way around here because there's just not enough space on the road, and you get too many delays. Maybe send the third one all the way over here or something. I don't know. You'll have to pick a better road than I did. But for core level play, don't send all your guys on one road, is von Moltke's advice. And I think that's basically like all of the really important mistakes that I keep seeing over and over again in the games. And a lot of this stuff applies to like different eras as well, right? Like the fact that cavalry get messed up in the woods is kind of universal to cavalry. So this is going to apply in medieval settings as well, or Roman settings, or even like World War I settings where you still have horses involved. It doesn't really matter what the period is. Like a horse is a horse, and if it wants to march in formation, it's going to have a difficult time in the woods. And that's just kind of universal of what's going on. And same kind of thing for infantry retreating in medieval times. Obviously the frontages are a lot narrower in medieval times, and so are the intervals, but the intervals still need to exist. And the Romans actually talk about this. Vegetius mentions that you should leave intervals for your men to run away through. A lot of these principles, when you think about them, apply to lots of different other periods of warfare. Hopefully you can take some of these lessons and apply them to your own game, either as a player or as an umpire. I think your games will be a lot higher quality, and you'll probably win a lot more as a player if you keep these pieces of advice in mind. So anyways, that is the extent of this very long, very advanced, very dense tutorial. I hope it's been helpful to you. Take care.